Yeah, so I think that we often kind of mix, it's a false divide between the economy and community, and that really what we're told is the economy is something that's big and it's over there and it's corporations and it's not for us, and that actually we are an intrinsic part of the economy. It's how we define what that economy is, and that some of that's informal, some of that's paid. And so that's why I'm really interested to hear from our speakers today, because I think you each reflect kind of different aspects of that and can kind of show how people are building power in different ways. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, which is Thobile from Makers Valley in Johannesburg. Hey, nice to see you.
Hey, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Just hold on a sec. Okay, cool. It's sharing. Thank you. Like I said, for having me. I am really just intrigued by this conversation and the variety of people that are on this panel. I feel like I'm learning a lot. So it's awkward to be a speaker when I'm actually understanding this concept with fresh eyes. I think Ed was the first one to ever speak about new municipalism to me. And I just thought, hey, this is actually what we are doing in our community. So actually, Francis had mentioned that I'm from South Africa. I'm in Johannesburg. And yeah, I wanted to paint a picture of what South Africa is like and why there's been a need for what we are doing in our community. And South Africa in 1994 had a dawn of new hope. It was a historical year because it was our first time that Black and African people had an opportunity to vote. And yeah, what was a promise of transformation and completely, new hope for our country, 27 years later is not the case. And there's a real sense of disappointment, frustration, and anger in South Africa currently, and like a real sense of actually, why are we waiting and why are we relying on the government to provide change that they've promised over these 27 years when it hasn't even come to fruition. And a big thing that we found is that there are huge inequalities in South Africa. I think South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. And if you look at that, you see, literally, if you come and look at a demarcation or a map of South Africa, you can actually see the inequalities in their different areas because that's how society was divided in apartheid. So you actually see the inequality. If you are from a poor society, across the road, you see Sandton City, which is completely different living standards to your own. And it really causes this anger and sense of frustration, and what we think also obviously high levels of crime. So in South Africa, I think we were in the Mayo Crime Index for 2021, we were actually the third most dangerous country in the world. And the biggest thing, the overall consensus in terms of the biggest crime in the categories, the biggest crime category for us was greed, well, related to corruption and bribery. And that has been, I think, the pet peeve of us South African citizens, because the government that came into power, that promised the world, that represented us as a people, majority Black and African people, have been the very same people to steal from us, to take what we were promised into their own hands and into their own homes and into their own pockets. And so the cycle of greed and corruption has really brought a really negative light in terms of our government at the moment. So yeah, we are frustrated and angry. That's all I can say about this slide. And so there's a real sense of urgency for change. What has been also very disappointing is that when COVID-19 came into the picture, it was an opportunity for our government to really put in new policies, because clearly the policies over the 27 years, the conservative macroeconomic policies that have been in place were clearly not working. And so we saw this as an opportunity for change. We saw this as an opportunity to strengthen social security. And unfortunately, instead of that, actually under investigation currently 10.5 billion rand of COVID fraud and corruption is underway in our country. So they're really, I can't stress enough how angry people are and how, you know, not trusting of the government we are. And even with the vaccinations coming to roll out soon in our country, that they've just started with the over 60-year-olds, there is huge mistrust. And also just, yeah, very skeptical about how it's going to be rolled out. Are people going to make this, make money off of this? So it really has put a real spanner into the works of our country, which is disappointing because in our community, we've seen COVID really bring us together and spark some creativity and innovation, which I'll share with you just now. So yes, a bit about us and our organization. We are the Makers Valley Partnership, and we actually made Ed, I think it's 2 years ago now, and we had done this exchange program to understand what was happening in Plymouth and how we could also possibly replicate or strengthen what we were doing in our community. So we've always believed that creative and social entrepreneurship is a driving force for our community, and Johannesburg is, we call for short, Jersey. And it's a real hub of entrepreneurship. It's a real place of urbanization. Our community, I think, is really special and unique because it's so diverse. We call it a little melting pot of Africa, because you'll find every ethnicity, every race, every culture, religion in this area that we've called the Makers Valley. And so this is kind of our mandate. We want to enable the Makers Valley neighborhood towards a well-being economy through social and creative entrepreneurship development. And I think why I wanted to mention the fact that we've called it this ourselves, it's not a government name. We kind of mobilize the community together to say, how can we create a vision? We've been impoverished for way too long. You know, the promises of government haven't come to our community. And how can we activate change for ourselves? And so a series of dialogues and conversations with our community came about, and the name Makers Valley came to being. And essentially it is because we believe we are a community of makers, obviously a very creative community, but also change makers. And we actually located in a valley, literally, with the Yokske River, a very important river in South Africa, running through our community. So I think that was one of the biggest things, is that mobilizing a community for a shared vision was something that I felt really ties into the theme of this, because without that, there wouldn't have been this unity and this drive, this active participation amongst our community members for something more. And so even though we didn't have the actual aspects of what it is, just having this vision of what we wanted to see in our community really got the community together, and then started to think about what are the ways that we're going to do this. And so, yeah, I've put the SDGs here because it's kind of a global thing. Obviously, I don't think it's really relevant. Everything is relevant to our context, but I thought it would give you a picture of how we're driving societal change in our community, because it's something that everyone understands. But essentially, we have said is that we want our community to empower change. We're not going to wait for anyone to come and save the day. How can everyone in our community be active participants for change? And we thought this is best through social entrepreneurship and obviously creative entrepreneurship. We have a huge youth population in our country, and we really believe that if we can give them a sense of ownership, they would stay in the community. Because what happens is, especially in our community, they will always look for greener pastures. As soon as they've, had high school or they go into tertiary, they move on into a different place where there's greener pastures. But we found with this model of mobilizing social entrepreneurship and saying, hey, you've got amazing ideas for societal issues that you yourself has experienced in this community. Why don't we provide a platform for you to come up with this, to incubate you, to develop your enterprise, your social entrepreneurship model that will address a societal need that you yourself have faced and you're obviously passionate about. And what we've started to see is that because there's that investment, instead of you just going to an NGO, because that's how majority of our nonprofits in South Africa work, is that they will say, we address the specific SDG and you come to us in order to make the change. Come and volunteer with us. Whereas we say, no, you have the idea, you have the vision, you have the experience, you are on the ground. We can help you create this enterprise, which will not only address the social issue, but also be sustainable, give you an income to obviously live and in the community, but also entice you not to leave. And so we're reducing that cycle of poverty. So we're really excited about that. And obviously a big issue in South Africa, I think it's one of the highest, is I think it's 46.2% at the moment, unemployment in South Africa at the moment. So that's a huge, huge, huge issue. And in our community, it's, you know, we've got 56% of our community, specifically the youth population, that are unemployed. So yes, jobs are needed, and we look to corporates and the government to create that, but we really believe that the social entrepreneurs in our community, if they can generate an income for themselves and be sustainable enough, they can start to also create jobs and employment further down the line. So this is just an example of some of the social enterprises that are under our umbrella, the Makers Valley. We've got various different types that address various issues, like you can see, and I'll go into some examples just now, but that's just to say, as Makers Valley Partnership, we don't just look at one specific SDG, we are mobilizing the community to activate them. Yeah, and then I mentioned that COVID-19 came about. So we were doing this before. We were doing incubation programs, development programs. We have a donated space in the community, which acts as the hub for entrepreneurship. It's where we do programming, where we have connect sessions, poetry events, etc. But because of COVID, we saw that a lot of this wasn't able to take place. And so we really had to connect with our community again to understand what are the most pressing needs. And I think, you know, when I spoke about the government just going completely, like, revealing their true character through COVID also revealed the true character of our community, which was beautiful because it gave us a sense of togetherness, is what we would say in South Africa. It's a very slang word for this sense of let's do this together. And we went to over 2,000 households, knocking on the doors. Even though the police came and stopped us, we had to ask and understand what is happening in your household, who has been affected by job losses, how many people are relying on you and your income. So we just did a little bit of a survey to understand the most pressing needs. And it tied into some of these trends that we saw globally, that businesses, you know, incubators and accelerators weren't really what was needed at the moment. Regenerators was something that we needed to do, because these organizations or enterprises that we had just incubated and had gone through seed funding, etc., actually, when COVID broke, had to use that income to just survive. So because all the opportunities of market access to market were kind of hindered because of COVID, they really asked us for ways that we can help regenerate their business. How do they get to where they were before? And then we also realized that we needed to become more self-reliant and resilient. And I think that was crucial for us, because there is this kind of narrative in South Africa, because the government had promised, that we are waiting on government. And that's why I keep saying that a sense of agency is something that we really promote in Makers Valley, to say, actually, let's not wait. And we've even had to rethink how we brand ourselves, because we wear these yellow t-shirts, and everything in South Africa is like a political party is going to come and save the day. They saw our yellow t-shirts in the community and they thought we were the next political party. And we had to completely, like, combat that thinking, because we are saying, no, we don't have the answers. We want to help you find the answers yourselves. And so this aspect of being resilient, coming up with solutions for ourselves, has been a very new concept, but very exciting to see it unfold. And then obviously urban farming is something that has a low-hanging fruit. It's something that you would expect Africans to be doing, but very interesting how we have become very westernized, even in our consumption in South Africa and in Johannesburg specifically. And so things that were perhaps normal for us 50, to 100 years ago have become very foreign. And so this concept of urban farming has been reintroduced into the community, and gogos and the elder community have really also found their place where they've felt kind of not useful. This COVID kind of mobilization has brought in every single person from our community, whether you're old or young, coming together once again to think of solutions. And urban farming was such a beautiful one, where we see the elderly come back and share their knowledge, their African wisdom in terms of what to plant and not to. So yeah, my last slide, which is not clicking, oh, there we go, is just a picture of the various initiatives, and I'll deep dive into some of them just now. But one of the solutions that came up was we were doing soup kitchens, which were your traditional soup kitchens, everyone coming to a center where the meals were provided and cooked, queues and queues of people, again, cops coming to stop what we're doing. But interestingly enough, the community just supported us all the way. And eventually we identified 6 community kitchen champions who said, this is not sustainable. Let us as community heroes who are known and trusted in the community take on a portion of what you're doing. And so we have now diverted, instead of us having the soup kitchen run centrally, we have now pockets of these community kitchens run by mamas, again, people that were not working, just sitting in the community, who are now cooking and serving their community. But not only that, they're looking at it as a social enterprise for themselves. So we mobilized assets for them, but now these 6 kitchens are going through training and understanding what entrepreneurship is all about. Tuesdays and Thursdays, they cook for the community, but on the other days, they use those assets, their pots, their pans, their gas stoves, to have mobile kitchens, to cook at weddings, for example, and funerals, to go into markets, etc. And so, yeah, it's a very grassroots kind of intervention, but I think it's been amazing to see people that were unemployed find use for themselves, but also find use for their community as well. So they've been incredible. And what we're doing with the community kitchens is really just thinking about how we can also create this circular economy. So looking at ways that the surplus food or the food waste that is generated, potato peels, etc., can go into a mini biogas digester, and that fuels the gas that they need then to cook the meals. So we're always looking at little solutions around that, but also because these solutions are quite new, it's also educating our community at the same time. The other example, which is over here, is our community recycling project. So recycling is a very, very, I mean, in our community, is a concept that don't even know what recycling means. So you'll find in the north, in the more suburban areas, obviously the white communities do recycle, but Black people just in African communities don't really understand the concept. However, this was an assumption that we thought wouldn't work, and we did a 2-week pilot to see if the community would be mobilized in that direction. And this came from one local creative waste management company, young couple in their 20s, thinking, can we mobilize the community to recycle? Because us as a creative waste management company can use that waste, obviously when they go back to the buyback centers and sell it in quantities and in bulk, they benefit for their business, but also they can use those items to create products, to do educational programs and workshops with kids, etc. So they are one of the social enterprises that we had worked with and partnered with and incubated in Makers Valley, but then they are from the community and live there and said, hey, we've got this idea. So eventually printed out this flyer with, I don't know how many languages, it was 11, I think, 11 languages, because I've explained our community is very diverse, to explain this concept of recycling. And what we're finding now, to cut a long story short, is that 350 people currently are recycling every single week, 3 times a week. And it sounds small, but it's incredible. And as more people understand the concept and see what it looks like, more people are doing it. But in addition to that, we've now started a community swap shop, where when you recycle and bring your bag of recyclable items, you get a point, which we call an MVP, and you can access surplus food. So a big thing in South Africa, 3 billion tons of food is wasted every single year. And we then work with various organizations that divert the food to our community, and our community can access that food through recycling. So it goes back into this active participation thing, not just lining up in a queue and waiting for food, but a more dignified experience where people are acting and really being participatory in uplifting the community and earning food in return. So it's been an interesting concept. We've got lots of learnings, but what we found is that people actually prefer to go to the recycling swap shop than to a community kitchen and line up to get a meal. They get to choose what they want at the shop. They can choose maize, they can choose whatever items they need. It also further reduces food waste because they're actually taking items that they want and need for their household. And so it's been such a beautiful picture of how something that we might think only works in one context and something that we thought actually wouldn't be possible has been incredible because it's spoken to the direct needs of our community. So it's been amazing to see that. The other things that we do is obviously the space that I've mentioned is our hub, and that's where our community members can come, feel safe to think of new ideas, to see how it can benefit the community, and then go through a development program of making this an actual enterprise. So that hub really starts from a grassroots level to ensure that we are helping people with digital literacy. How do you turn a computer on? How do you read emails, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can get to a point of what is enterprise development really. But yes, there are so many different change makers in our community, and I could share a list of them. But I think what stands out for me and what I wanted to share is that because we have this range of diverse minds, young and old, obviously various ethnicities and religions all coming together because of this thing that has impacted us all equally, we've come into think of solutions together. And so Makers Valley Partnership, especially when Ed came about 3 years ago, we're working with various pockets and, some change makers that we had identified. But what we've started to see is this momentum build and kind of a ripple effect of more people wanting to get involved, more people understanding this concept of, hey, actually, I can do something and not just sit at home. We have this concept, well, we call it sit at home concept because that is just what our community has been faced with, because they haven't had anything that they know what to do. They haven't had the steps of how do I address the situation in my community. And so, yeah, the civic education part of it, of who are you? What is your vision for this community? Why do you feel like you belong in this community? I think has been such a great conversation to have, and it's really been kind of unpacked during COVID-19 when people have got to see the real, raw, honest situations of their neighbors. So yeah, that's just a glimpse of our community. I don't know if I've made you a little bit more confused than you started, but I think I just wanted to paint a picture of the things that are taking place. I know we only had 10 minutes, but I'd love to hear your questions if you have. Thank you,
Thobile. That's an amazing, very quick skip through what looks like an incredible project. I just, before we open it up to the floor, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the premises and the land that you've got. Do you own that?
No, we don't. So yeah, to give you a little bit of context, so Makers Valley is an area of about 5 communities or 5 areas in the map. And it's about maybe a 5-kilometer radius, essentially. In the center of that, we do have some stakeholders that were very surprising to be there in the first place, because the area that we're in is a very impoverished area. Nothing happens there, but Nando's are a big stakeholder there, and they chose that area because yeah, they've got a lot of the Nando's maybe 20 years ago started in that area and built they built their culture of Nando's and their restaurants from that area specifically. So they're a big stakeholder there, and they've got their head office there. And Victoria Yards is a fairly new development which started 6 years ago, and they are based in this community as well. And it is this relationship with Victoria Yards that has kind of put us in this community as Makers Valley Partnership. Victoria Yards is an establishment for artisans. You have a workshop / retail space, and it's really a creative entrepreneurial kind of like gem in the inner city. And what's amazing about the relationship with Victoria Yards is that they've donated a space, because this concept of gentrification is something that we are exploring and navigating. And how do we do this without the displacement of the people in the community? So we have in South Africa, well, specifically and very close to us, an example of what had happened maybe 10 years ago of gentrification, and very exciting, but actually just completely 10 years later, we see the effects of how the community was completely left to ruin in that area. It's called Maboneng. And we didn't want to repeat what had happened there. And so Makers Valley Partnership has kind of stood in that gap to say, how can we help? Because if you walk around and do the survey, everyone in this community wants to see improvement. They want to see potholes being repaired. They want to see street lights being installed. They want to have access to Wi-Fi. So how do we improve the community without driving up property prices, making sure that the community is involved every single step of the way? And so that's been our role as Makers Valley Partnership, to ensure that the community have a say in what happens in their area.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's such an issue. I'm sure other speakers will talk about the, adding value to landowners' land, and aiding gentrification is such a tension. There's a few more questions from the chat. So one was, are people able to become members of Makers Valley?
So yeah, this is something that we have been exploring, and I know there's some other models that work with membership. We are in June actually going to have a membership, but it's for free. We are looking at ways that we can generate income ourselves as an organization, but we don't believe that paying for a membership is possible in the context that we're in, and it would just create barriers. So a membership that does give you the feeling that you're part of this community, that you have access to these newsletters, etc. So creating that community aspect, but not actually a paid for membership, is what we'll be launching in June.
Thank you. And the other two questions I think we can probably put together, which is really that, well, have you been allowed to sort of get on with it, or are you seen as a threat? But also, have you been politically active? So we haven't been politically active. We only registered formally as a non-profit last year, so we are fairly new to the game, and it's not something that we wanted to participate in. Like I mentioned, people are looking at us as a political party, and that's not the place that we wanted. However, we've almost by default started to play in this space, and it's because of the need and people looking to us to play that part. And it's actually a very interesting thing that we're navigating as an organization at the moment. I don't have an actual answer, but I think what we know is that we want to create citizens that are active for themselves. So this dependency notion we want to throw out the window and say, hey, you don't have to rely on anyone to see this happen to your community. And that's kind of the narrative that we've been sticking to. What was the other question? I think I missed the first part of it. Sort of more, have you been allowed to get on with it, sort of?
Oh, yes. So yeah, it's been interesting because, like I mentioned, we were faced with a lot of opposition, specifically at the beginning of COVID. What was interesting is that, because of the corruption, our community never saw the food parcels or the PPE or anything that was promised by government that was supposed to come into our community. However, we were still faced with opposition. So people are hungry and starving and didn't have anywhere to go, but there was nowhere else to go. And so we really just carried on. We spoke to the various parties, and I think what was taking place in South Africa, it's not just our community. We started to see other communities struggling with the same issues. And so we then formed and got part of what we call the community action networks, which really peaked during COVID. And as a kind of movement of community action networks, we started to be able to put pressure on the various policies that we're putting into place around COVID and around how we respond, you know, the legal entities that could intervene, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, we started to see those structures weaken and more kind of freedom given to nonprofits during that time, which it hadn't started like that. But I think the community action networks, specifically in Cape Town and Johannesburg, really made an impact in that space.
Thank you so much, Thobile. There'll be a chance for people to go into the breakout rooms and think of other questions. And I know you're staying with us, aren't you? So we'll be able to ask the questions later. Really, really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much.